Welcome to episode 3 of the Jedi Temple Archives podcast.
There is more knowledge here than anywhere else in the galaxy. Only members of the Jedi Council are allowed access. Guarding the holocrons is one of the most important duties a Jedi can be given. Do you think you're up to the task?
Fans, and welcome to episode 3 of the Jedi Temple Archives podcast. I'm Rob, your host, and I'll be joined again this week by Tom, who is my fellow caretaker of First Knowledge, and again, also the host of the Hyperion Adventures podcast. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do so. They just started a series this week on remembering Star Wars and kind of going back and renewing your memories or reviewing the films up to this point in time and talking about kind of our thoughts and impressions of what those were. They were kind enough to have me join them again this week, and it was a great show. So I would definitely advise any Star Wars fan to go out there and check out their podcast. Tom, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and we really enjoyed your content on our last show, which we broke down Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, as we count down towards the Episode 9 and what is tabbed as the end of the Skywalker saga.
Excellent. And, you know, obviously we always have a great time talking Star Wars. For the purposes of this podcast, we are recording this on Monday, March 25th of 2019. And our topic this week is going to be the denizens, essentially, of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, the individuals who run the shops, the restaurants, and more importantly, some of the attractions, and to give you a little bit of backstory on those characters and how they fit into the Star Wars universe. Additionally, this will give you kind of some context for who they are, and hopefully that'll enrich your experience when you do go and visit Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. So, Tom, hopefully you're ready to dive right into that, and we'll get started.
Let's do it to it. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So, really, for me, the question I get the most often is, who is Hondo Ohnaka? So this is the character that is the centerpiece of Smuggler's Run, which is the Millennium Falcon attraction within Galaxy's Edge. And for those who have watched the animated series, especially the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, he's going to be more of a familiar character. But for folks who have only watched the movies, you're probably not going to be familiar with Hondo at all. And he is a very important character, and he's actually incredibly well developed throughout the animated series. And he becomes kind of a similar character to Han Solo, perhaps.
Right. I kind of look at him kind of a cross between a little bit of Lando Calrissian and a little bit of Han Solo, and that he's just kind of always working that extra edge somewhere, trying to get the advantage, trying to do something that benefits himself. He's kind of working on the edge to make sure that somehow whatever he works out, and sometimes it's for the good, sometimes maybe not, but whatever it works out, it's good for Hondo.
Right. And the interesting thing about him is that he is probably more mercenary as a pirate than any, comparable character, be it Han Solo or Lando Calrissian. Really, when you are introduced to him in the Clone Wars, there's no mercy in him. He is essentially looking for his score. He wants to make sure that he can make the most money as he can off any given enterprise that he's involved in, and he really doesn't seem to care too much who gets hurt in the process.
Right. That's how he began his journey, as it seems like. And it seems like he's a pretty ruthless pirate to begin with. But as we see moving on throughout the Clone Wars and well into Star Wars Rebels as well, there's a little bit of a different side to him. Still, he's always looking out for himself, but there's a little more. And yes, you're right. He developed as a character very well within both those series.
Terrific. So the most important thing to understand about Hondo is he is a member of a species called the Weequay, and he's a male. So the Weequay are from a planet called Srilur, and that's an outer rim territory. It's a desert planet, and because of the harsh environment on that planet, the Weequay have developed a very tough and thick skin. It almost looks bark-like. He's not Groot, but essentially he has that kind of weathered look to him. Their skin is actually so tough it can provide a certain amount of resistance to even a blaster bolt. Due to their tough nature, they are really ideal for serving as bodyguards, mercenaries, and especially bounty hunters. So for those of you who only are familiar with Star Wars from the films, the character that you probably be most familiar with, who's also a member of that Weequay species, is a character named Pegedi Rook, and he was present on one of Jabba the Hutt's skiffs when Han Solo and Chewbacca and Luke Skywalker were being taken out to put in the Sarlacc pit, and Pegedi Rook was the character who actually prodded Luke out onto that gangplank to have him leap into the Sarlacc pit, prodded him out there with his vibro axe. So if you ever go back and watch the films, pay special attention to him. He is another character who's a Weequay and a member of that same species as Hondo.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't really pick it out until you mentioned that to me. That was he was from the same species. I had to look back at the pictures of him in the film. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see it now because I'm only used to seeing Hondo in the animated versions of the Star Wars universe. So it's a little bit different when you look at it from live action versus animated. But yeah, you can see it when you look back at it.
Yeah, it's totally understandable. In all fairness, Hondo is definitely a more refined look for that species. He's definitely been cleaned up, and Pegedi Rook, if you look at him, he's kind of a rougher looking character. So it may just play into the fact that he's a member of Jabba's band and probably was involved in some pretty sketchy stuff.
Right. I think and the member of Jabba's band, isn't he the one that hits the big old drums that are over his head? He's kind of moving his on. They're really cool.
You'd think so, right?
Right.
So one of the really cool things about Hondo in the Clone Wars is that he was a pretty tough character. He was known for having captured Count Dooku, who was the leader of the Separatists, as well as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker all at the same time in one of his little operations. And throughout the Clone Wars, he was a constant thorn in the side of the Jedi, especially Obi-Wan and Anakin, to the point where there were even some situations where, he and Anakin were in battle against each other, and he attempted to kill Anakin Skywalker. So, again, he was, as we mentioned earlier, mercenary, and he was really not pulling any punches when it came to anyone who was messing with his operations.
No, he was out for himself. He was out for his group, his band of pirates, and he wanted to make sure that they came in on top every time.
Hondo was also involved with both Jango Fett and Boba Fett. He had a very high level of respect for Jango Fett, and after Jango Fett was killed by Mace Windu in that scene in the Attack of the Clones in the arena, Boba Fett actually fell in with a bounty hunter named Aura Singh, who was someone that Hondo was romantically linked to, and eventually they ended up coming to seek Hondo's assistance with one of their schemes. In the process of that whole situation, they ended up getting interrupted by Ahsoka Tano, who we've mentioned a few times on this show. We're going to go into her in more detail in a future episode. But for the purposes of this conversation, it's probably most important to note that she was Anakin Skywalker's Padawan during the Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. And Ahsoka ended up capturing Boba Fett, and at the same time, Aura Singh attempted to escape in Boba Fett's ship, which was the one that he inherited from his father Jango Fett, which was the Slave One, and she ended up crashing that ship in an attempt to escape. It turned out that Hondo, unbeknownst to everyone else, had actually helped Aura Singh escape, and he took possession of the Slave One and was able to fix that up and became the owner of that ship for a period of time.
Always looking out for himself, always finding a way out for him and his band, for sure, every time.
Anyone who's familiar with the Slave One, very cool ship. It ended up being rebuilt by Boba. That's the Slave 2 that most people are familiar with in the original trilogy. Also, during the Clone Wars, later Hondo was able to capture Ahsoka Tano, who was transporting a group of Jedi younglings who were out in the process of going to the planet of Ilum to get their lightsaber crystals. And Hondo and his band of pirates were looking to capture those younglings and get those kyber crystals because they were very rare and very valuable.
Yeah, another great episode. Really showed some in-depth of how some of the younglings get trained, what they have to go through. Really interesting stuff. And Ahsoka, I'm looking forward to when we get to the episode to talk about Ahsoka, because she's one of my favorite characters of all time.
Yeah, that may be an episode that goes a little bit long. I think we both have a lot to say about her. Kind of the downfall of Hondo came later in the Clone Wars. His base ended up being broken up by General Grievous, who kind of had a bone to pick with him based on some earlier encounters the two had had. And shortly thereafter, Darth Maul, who, for those of you who didn't know, Darth Maul survived being cut in half. Apparently, the Marvel universe isn't the only place. Right. It's not the only universe that you can come back from what should be a fatal wound. But Darth Maul and his night brother, who was a Dathomiri called Savage Opress, were looking to... I love
that name, by the way.
Yeah, I know. It is great. And the two of them were awesome together. But they were looking to, start another reign of destruction. They attempted to take over Hondo's gang, and that entire attempt was broken up by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jedi Master Adi Gallia. Hondo was someone who was tied very deeply into a lot of important characters during the Clone Wars, and anyone who's interested in kind of getting a better idea of who he is, I would strongly recommend you go look at the Clone Wars, watch that. Right now, that is on Netflix, and it's set to expire on Netflix on April 7th, but that will be something that we expect to be coming back to the Disney Plus streaming service when that comes out later this year.
I don't think there's any question that it will be there, so look forward to that. But if you want to get a chance to look into Hondo, definitely check out Clone Wars. You should just check out Clone Wars anyways, because it's a magnificent series, a magnificent piece of animation that really expands on a lot of things that in some ways we're missing from the prequel trilogy in between Attack of the Clones and The Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, and it's really a testament to how much took place between the end of the Attack of the Clones and the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. You really get a really good insight into what led to the fall of Anakin, and really the Jedi losing their ability to perceive the danger that was rising with the Sith.
And it also expands on Anakin himself, and just that because you always hear about if you just watch the films, you hear that he's this hero, that he's done magnificent things to help the Republic, but you don't really see it as much in the film. Yes, you see a few little glimpses here and there, but you don't really get the depth of it. But if you watch the Clone Wars, you realize that how important he was within the Clone Wars and in the battles themselves, how much he helped the Republic, how much he was a hero, even though he was a troubled, very bipolar in many regards hero. He was definitely a hero of the Republic.
Yeah, and I mean, you would be fair to say that he had a very good heart, but that really was what got leverage to turn him to the dark side. He cared so intensely about people that his anger when those people were put in danger was a huge, portion of what caused him to fall.
Yeah, and you just feel for him a little more after watching his interactions, especially, and again, we were talking about Ahsoka Tano a little bit earlier, his interactions with his Padawan, Ahsoka Tano, throughout this, and their kind of interplay between the two of them, and of course Obi-Wan as well, really draws out a lot of what you miss in the prequel films out of Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. To get back to Hondo, so at the end of the Clone Wars and with the rise of the Galactic Empire, the Imperials came in and broke up Hondo's gang, known as the Ohnaka gang, and he was essentially forced to continue his life of piracy by himself. Interestingly enough, he did have a tie-in to one of the characters from the Solo movie, which was Kira. And during this period of time where he was working on his own, he had teamed up with the bounty hunter IG-88, who was one of the bounty hunters brought in by Darth Vader during The Empire Strikes Back to track down the rebels, and specifically Han Solo and Princess Leia. And the two of them teamed up to try to capture Kira, who was Dryden Voss's lieutenant in the Crimson Dawn crime syndicate. They were actually able to capture her, but in typical fashion, she was able to turn the tables on them by causing them to fight amongst themselves, and she was able to take advantage of that and ultimately claim the bounties on both of their heads. So she was definitely someone not to be trifled with, and I think we saw a little bit of that in the Solo movie.
Yeah, she's a survivor. I think we only got a little glimpse of that within Solo itself, but you could tell where that she'd gone a long way to get where she was, and most of it was fighting and finding her way through things, scrounging her way off of Corellia.
Yeah. Also, shortly after that, in the years preceding the Battle of Yavin, Hondo had run across a group who was the crew of the Ghost, which is a group of the very early rebels, and they are covered in the show appropriately named Star Wars Rebels. And one of the members of that crew was a character named Ezra Bridger, again, another character who's more than deserving of his own episode. Mm-hmm. But Hondo's path had crossed with Ezra on numerous times during this period in the 4 or 5 years leading up to the Battle of Yavin and the events of Star Wars A New Hope. And despite the fact that Hondo still kind of maintained his pirate ways, he started to display a lot more of a reliable streak. He was an ally to the members of the Ghost, and again, he formed a very tight bond with Ezra Bridger to the point where by the end of that series, he was willing to put himself on the line to help out Ezra.
Yeah, he'd softened quite a bit since your first introduction to him within the Clone Wars. Definitely still pretty much the same Hondo, still looking out for himself, but not afraid to sacrifice himself in many ways to try and make sure that his crew, his friends, would somehow make it through along with him.
Yeah. And I think probably the most important thing that changed about him is, as you mentioned, he still wanted to make his profit, to pull off whatever his scheme was, but he was no longer able to sacrifice people who were trusting him in the process.
Right. He'd been so much on the run. He's found his, if it was one point he was in charge of this giant band of pirates, and now he was pretty much down almost on his own. He had a few different characters that kind of would travel with him that he'd find at different areas, but mostly it was him looking out for himself and just his small little group. And so anybody who could help him make it through, he was very loyal to them.
He also had really only one member of his crew per se at the time, a character named Melch, and it was really interesting to see because he definitely had developed a very strong attachment to his crew member as well. So there were a number of times where you could kind of see the softening of his character in the sense that he did definitely show concern for his one singular crew member, Melch.
Yeah, quite often, as a matter of fact, too, being very concerned of where Melch was at times. It was pretty interesting to watch.
Exactly. So in terms of how this all ties into Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, for those of you who are familiar with the events of The Last Jedi and the Battle of Crate at the end of that movie, we see the Millennium Falcon blast off from the planet Crate and, take off across the galaxy. And what had occurred is at some point, the Millennium Falcon wound up at Black Spire Outpost on the planet of Batuu. And Hondo at the time was running operations out of a portion of the city there called Bakar Spire. And he and Chewbacca ended up making a deal for Hondo to make use of the Millennium Falcon for some of his quote-unquote shipping endeavors. And that is basically what lays in the groundwork for what we're going to experience in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge as the Smuggler's Run attraction.
There'll be many, many, many shipping endeavors going up over and over and over again throughout the day there. I'm looking forward to taking part in them.
One of the other characters that people are going to be a little bit more familiar with when they start experiencing Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is the character of Doc Ondar, who we've mentioned on one of our earlier shows. Doc Ondar is an Ithorian male, so this would be the character that you would have seen during the cantina scene in Star Wars A New Hope and was affectionately referred to as the Hammerhead.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to be a familiar-looking character to a lot of Star Wars fans. He famously was known for his involvement with Dryden Voss and was actually present on Dryden Voss's yacht, which was the First Light, which we saw in, again, Solo, A Star Wars Story. When he was meeting with Tobias Beckett and Han Solo, you can actually hear Kira asking if Doc Ondar is being well tended to.
Right. Obviously, a very important person to Dryden Voss by the fact that Kira is making sure that he is taken care of.
Yeah, I think the kind of implied parallel there is if you look at Dryden Voss's chambers on the First Light, he has a lot of different trinkets scattered around the room, a lot of antiquities. Ironically enough, if you take a really good look at it, you can see the gold statue that was present in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So there's some kind of cool knickknacks in the background there. But with Doc Ondar being a dealer of antiquities, I think it's probably a safe bet to say that he provides some of that some of those items to Dryden Voss.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all, and especially since that's what he'll be doing a little bit of, from what it looks like, when we actually get to Black Spire Outpost.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about Doc Ondar within the framework of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is he is going to be the other character in addition to Hondo Ohnaka, who's going to actually be physically present as an audio animatronic, and the guests are actually going to be able to interact with him and potentially make deals with him if you're savvy enough for items within his shop.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to get to interact with him or if the shopkeepers that are there that work for him are going to interact with him. But either way, you are going to be, from everything we hear, there is going to be some sort of barter system worked out where you may be able to, I don't know, barter on the price, barter on using items, whatever the case may be, to pick up some of these things you might get from his shop.
Yeah, and I think we're all looking forward to checking out how that's going to play out within Star Wars Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah, so just add it to the list. Just add it to the list.
Right. Some of the other characters within Galaxy's Edge who run some of the shops that you're going to be able to visit include Savi, who is a human male, who along with a group that he calls the Gatherers, run Savi's workshop, which is the location where you're going to be able to craft a lightsaber. The interesting thing about the Gatherers and Savi himself is that they're Jedi admirers who are striving to bring balance to the Force by teaching Force sensitives how to construct their own lightsabers. And the other very cool thing about the Gatherers is that they have gone out and compiled a fairly large assortment of components to use in the crafting of those lightsabers. And one of the very rare items that you may be able to use is a Rancor tooth. So I don't know
what dentist was that one from?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sitting there thinking, I'd be interested to see how they harvest those, but clearly they have some sort of a method to do so.
Very nice. Interesting stuff. Yeah, I'm looking forward to all that stuff, checking out to see the different things. A Rancor tooth. Wow, what does a lightsaber with a Rancor tooth look like? That'd be fascinating.
Yeah, there is actually some scenarios within the Star Wars Legends stories where some of the Jedi from some of the more remote planets, and I believe one of them from Dathomir, had crafted their lightsaber using something similar to that. So it will be interesting to see if that is actually what they use for the hilt or if it's integrated into the lightsaber in some other way.
Yeah.
So the other primary shop that most people are going to be familiar with is Mubo's Droid Depot. And unfortunately, we really don't know a whole lot about Mubo himself. He's still somewhat of a mystery. So the assumption there is that that's going to be a character who's going to kind of have his story revealed as part of the experience within Star Wars Galaxy's Edge.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine within the land itself. And then we also have, there's comics and several books that are scheduled to be coming out. They're going to give a little more backstory behind Batuu and Black Spire Outpost and, of course, the land of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. So we may find out some of it there, some of it within the park itself.
Yep. And then we have a couple of stalls that also sell some merchandise, and the characters that are tasked with running those would be Zabaka, who is a female Toydarian. So as Tom and I were just talking about on their podcast this week, where we were making some references to Watto, the flying blue alien that was the owner of Anakin Skywalker and his mother. That is what you're going to be able to think of when you think of a Toydarian. Zabaka is going to be integrated into that stall as she's going to be kind of in a back room behind a frosted glass window, and you're going to be able to see her shadow kind of flitting around behind that window. She runs the Toydarian Toy Maker shop, and most of the items within that stall are going to be handcrafted dolls similar to what you would have seen with Jyn Erso in Rogue One. So they are going to have that Stormtrooper doll, but they have a few others, I believe, as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting stuff. And that's one of the things I also like about what they're doing with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is that they're not just shipping in the usual stuff you'll find at any other Disney store or whatever. This is all going to be items that are particularly created for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and are going to feel very much like they're created right there by Zabka the Toydarian.
That's right. And, one of the other items that I think that they had released some photos of fairly early in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge being promoted was a AT-AT that is riveted together out of various pieces of metal. So everything that they're going to be selling within the land is going to be kind of sourced from Star Wars itself. It's not going to be branded Star Wars Galaxy's Edge merchandise. These are things that you would expect the people who live in this galaxy to be crafting for consumption by other people within that Star Wars universe.
They're not coming from Kenner or, whatever, Lego.
Yeah, I think that's probably safe to say. I mean, maybe if you really look at it closely, you may be able to find one of those, but it's certainly not going to look like what you would consider to be a quote-unquote typical Star Wars toy.
Yes.
And the other stall that is going to be one of the primary attractions within that land is going to be the creature stall. And this is run by a female of unknown species named Bina. And she is going to be offering numerous creatures for sale that have been collected from throughout the galaxy, including everything from the Kowakian lizard monkey. So for those of you who are familiar with Salacious Crumb from Jabba's palace, the hideous little creature with the cackling laugh, to other items such as loth cats and puffer pigs. So I think the puffer pigs, from what I'm seeing, are going to be the one that most of the kids are going to want to go for. They seem fairly fun.
Yeah, I love the loth cats. I love them from Star Wars Rebels. I'm kind of interested in getting a loth cat to have around the house.
Yeah, there actually has been some talk that there are going to be, I don't know if it's going to be one or several, but they're going to potentially have some animatronic loth cats throughout the land as well.
Nice. That'd be great.
Yeah. Moving on from the shops, we're going to talk a little bit about the food locations. So the first and most talked about food location is going to be Oga's Cantina, which has been part of the conversation for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge since the very beginning. And the proprietor of that particular dining establishment is going to be a character named Oga Gera, who again is a female alien of unknown species. And the other character within that cantina is going to be R3X. So this is DJ Rex, formerly known as RX-24. And he has a bit of a backstory within Star Wars Rebels as well. He was actually flying the Star Commuter 2000 transport that the Rebels had leveraged in trying to take over some Imperial arms shipments. And during that particular episode, he was also voiced by Paul Rubens, who voiced Rex when he was involved with Star Tours within the Disney parks. And he's going to be reprising his role for R3X within the cantina as well.
Yeah, looking forward to that so much. I loved Captain Rex when in the old version of Star Tours, when he would just it'd always be his first trip, and he always would promise to get it right next time, but he just never really did. So maybe he's found his calling now as DJ Rex.
Well, we will find out, and I'm sure that he's going to have his own little interplay with the guests within the cantina as well.
I'm sure, and I'm looking. That is one of the things I'm most looking forward to. As soon as that was announced, we were at the D23 Expo a couple years back, and that was when they first announced that Rex was going to be a part of Galaxy's Edge, and it was so exciting for us because it's just kind of part of that. Disney and Star Wars lore, it's just one of those historic things that is fun to bring back in a different way. I think it's exciting.
Yeah, it's always very nice when they go out of their way to bring back a character that was kind of near and dear to the hearts of a lot of the park guests, and this is certainly an instance where they're doing that. Now, Tom, the next character that we're going to talk about, I know is probably a little bit familiar to you, Strano Cookie Tuggs, who was a deformed Ardiodac male, most famously known for being the head chef within Maz Kanata's palace on the planet of Takodana, or her castle, I guess is more appropriate. He is now going to be running a location called Docking Bay 7 Food and Cargo.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff there that I don't know what drew him away. Obviously, the fall of Maz's cantina, restaurant, whatever you want to call it, her base there on Takodana. drove him out of there, but what drove him way out to the very outer rim and to Batuu is going to be an interesting story indeed, I think.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, this is a character that prior to Galaxy's Edge I really hadn't heard much about, but there are some stories tied into Maz's castle on Takodana that involved good old Strano Cookie Tugs. And it turns out that he was, as a young Artiodac, he was someone who had come across some ancient holovids of a famed chef named Gourmanda. And that led to him developing a love of cooking as a youth. But due to the fact that he was deformed, he really struggled to find a position as a head chef based on that disfigurement. And when he did eventually meet Maz Kanata and she gave him a chance to become the chef within her operation, they were able to develop a friendship that lasted all the way through the destruction of her stronghold during the battle that we saw in The Force Awakens.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see. And I kind of wonder if there's a tie-in between the Resistance being on Batuu and someone who worked so closely with Maz Kanata, being in that location. Were you going to find out something in regards to that? I don't know, but I just find it an interesting coincidence, we'll say.
Yeah. I think there's probably a lot to that. A lot of the information that we've gotten so far about Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is based on your interactions with various characters within the land and kind of who you align yourself with. That's going to drive your overall siding with either the Resistance or the First Order, or whether you become more of a soldier of fortune or a smuggler, where you're not really aligned with either. So it's fair to guess that some of these characters are going to be tied more with one side or the other. And I think based on his association with Maz Kanata, you're probably pretty accurate with that assumption.
It totally makes sense. And again, looking forward to finding out.
Yeah. One of the other characters involved with the food and beverage business within Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is a character called Bakar, and he's a male of an unknown species. He has a cohort, I guess you'd call it, who is a droid named 8DJ8. And between the two of them, they run the establishment known as Ronto Roasters. So the interesting thing about Bakar is that he is a huge fan of pod racing, and his eatery is decorated with pod racing flags from all over the galaxy, and he even cooks the Ronto meat using a modified pod racer engine. So if anyone has seen any of the concept art for this particular establishment, it is a huge pod racing engine, and I think it's going to be really cool to see this actually come to life.
And pretty ingenious. I've seen the pod races, and when I was watching them, I never once, and I've done a fair amount of cooking in my time, but never once did I think, what would really do, those would do good at cooking some meat. I think that's what I need to get one of those up and fire up, a good rack of ribs on there or something.
Right, and his droid, 8DJ8, is a former smelter droid, so his role within the establishment is to basically stand next to the roaster itself and turn the meat on the spit. So apparently you have to be able to withstand some pretty high temperatures to do that, and he's just the droid for the job.
Right, he can take the heat, so he's going to stay in the kitchen.
That's right. It looks like you may have missed your business opportunity.
I'm telling you, I should have seen it all the time. I'm watching those pod racing. I should have known. I could have just, slapped up some tri-tip on there or something.
All right, and so the final character within Star Wars Galaxy's Edge that we have a little bit of information about is a character named Kat Saka, and Kat runs Kat Saka's Kettle. He's a Batuan farmer who's known for collecting spices from throughout the galaxy, and he integrates those spices with his colorful grain-based snack food that's going to be for sale to visitors. I think this is pretty well known to be a kettle corn stand, right, and it's going to have some sweet and spicy varieties. But I look forward to seeing if there's any more backstory to Kat Saka and if they build that out throughout the process of our experience within Galaxy's Edge.
Has he visited the spice mines of Kessel to get some of that stuff out there?
Well, if he hasn't, he made it back. He's one of the few.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure it was in more than 12 parsecs.
All right. So really, that's all we've got so far for information on the various characters that you're going to be meeting within Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. As more information comes out, I'm sure we'll revisit this topic. But for this point in time, this is really all we know. I know Tom is poised to get out there right on May 30th when the land opens at Disneyland Resort and get us some front and center information on that. So I guess we're just counting down the days until that occurs.
Oh, I have it on my calendar every day. It's like the Advent calendar opening up into the Star Wars window. What's today? Oh, it's Lando. Nice. Very excited about it. We will be there. We're not going to, as of right now, I'm still trying to work some things out, but we're not going to be there opening day. But the second day of opening out at Disneyland Resort, we will be there, and we're excited, very excited about it.
Yeah, probably just as well to avoid opening day. I think that's going to be fairly crazy. From what I was reading, and this kind of ties right into us dovetailing into the HoloNet news for the week, Disneyland Resort announced that every on-site Disneyland Resort hotel is completely booked for May 30th of 2019 in anticipation of the opening. So if you were hoping to get a room on property and take advantage of that guaranteed 2-hour window, unless there are cancellations, it looks like those are going to be very hard to come by. But I'm sure that between then and June 23rd, if you get out ahead of it, there's still going to be some opportunities to snag up those reservations.
Yeah, that's not the only way that they'll have reservations out there. It's not just going to be for resort hotel patrons. There will be other ways. They haven't disclosed them yet, but it wouldn't shock me if that comes all out here in just a couple weeks at Star Wars Celebration 2019 in Chicago.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Really, all I was referring to was just the guaranteed reservation, but as they have pointed out, you will be able to make a reservation for a 2-hour window via some yet to be announced means, and we'll all be looking forward to hearing what that is. I agree with you, Tom. It's probably going to be coming out during Star Wars Celebration.
Yeah, and if you were looking to get one of the resort hotel rooms and you weren't able to get them before they were all sold out, to see about getting on a wait list, because it wouldn't shock me. There's some of these prices, people are booking them at a pretty high rate, and maybe as they get a little closer to it, they look at their bank account and say, I really want to do Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, but I don't know if I can afford it, and some things might open up. So if you really want to do it and you don't mind paying the high price that it's going to be to stay in one of these resort rooms, try and give them a call and see if you can get on a wait list for them.
Yep. And one of the other interesting tidbits that came out over the past week was Jon Favreau, who is going to be the director or an executive producer of the Mandalorian series that'll be coming to the Disney Plus streaming service later this fall, had posted a picture out on Instagram with one of the directors for an episode of The Mandalorian, a gentleman by the name of Taika Waititi, and he is voicing an IG series assassin droid, and the picture that was posted was of him and the assassin droid that he's going to be voicing. So I think that is a great teaser for The Mandalorian. It's going to be very cool to see some of these characters in action, kind of on the lawless fringes of the galaxy, and I know that we're both looking forward to hearing more about it. Again, during Star Wars Celebration, they're going to have a panel on that coming up from April 11th through the 15th, and we will be posting updates on information that comes out during that celebration.
Absolutely. I'm going to be glued to any live feed that they may have. I'm hoping they have. They had last time in 2017, so I'm hoping they're going to do that again this time, and I will be glued to every little piece of information I can get out of that for all the stuff that's coming out. We're talking about The Mandalorian. We're talking about the Cassian Andor series that is coming up on Disney Plus as well. Of course, Episode 9. There's going to be some stuff on Galaxy's Edge. There's going to be some of the other animated series. There's going to be features on that, as well as the new video games that are coming. I know they're going to be demonstrating a little of that, so I'm excited about it all.
Yeah, the Fallen Order video game is something that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing, and hopefully that is something that we're going to have access to. I think they were talking around November of this year.
Yeah, I think right in time for Christmas.
Perfect. So the only other thing that I want to point out, and this also dovetails nicely with our conversation about Star Wars Celebration, is that on the official Star Wars site, they do now have the full schedule for that event on their page. There has been endless announcements about new guests that are going to be added to Star Wars Celebration this year. I think the most recent of which was Hayden Christensen, who you'd know as Anakin within the prequel series. So love him or hate him, he is going to be there. It's just going to be incredible to see all of the various guests that they've got that are going to be taking part in Celebration this year.
Yeah, there's a tremendous list of guests, some wonderful ones. I'm glad Hayden Christensen's coming back. He showed up for the first time again, really back into the Star Wars universe, back at Star Wars Celebration 2017, and he was welcomed with open arms, which for a long time he wasn't really, because just people didn't like the way the portrayal of Anakin was necessarily, and it kind of, you know how Star Wars fandom can get sometimes, and I think it kind of drove him away from acting and kind of somewhat really damaged his career. But it was good to see him finally be welcomed back into the fold. He had a great round of applause when he made the appearance, and obviously it was a warm enough welcome that he's willing to come back again for 2019. And there's some speculation out there that we may not be done seeing him in the Star Wars universe, possibly.
Yeah, I know that this was a topic that we had talked about on your podcast the other day, and I think we're both in agreement that, again, people need to take into consideration with these actors. You may not like the performance within the film, but I think it's important to keep in mind that what they're doing is they're delivering the performance that the director is asking for. And, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. All they were doing was their job. And ultimately, as Tom always points out, any one of these roles within a Star Wars film is something that any of us would have jumped at without even a second thought. So it's great to see that people like Hayden Christensen and other characters and actors that were involved with the prequel trilogy that had kind of gotten a rough time, people like Ahmad Best, are getting back out there and making appearances on the Star Wars Celebration circuit.
Ahmad Best, another one who's going to be making an appearance at Star Wars Celebration 2019 as well, for the Phantom Menace 20-year anniversary celebration panel that I believe is happening on the Monday. So you might want to check that out as well.
Absolutely. So again, I would definitely recommend that anyone who enjoys listening to Star Wars content go out and check out Tom and Michelle's podcast, Hyperion Adventures, and their new series that they've been putting out, which is the Remembering Star Wars, kind of building up to episode 9. Tom, do you want to give some information on how they can find your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. We're on pretty much all your basic podcast sites. You can find us. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. We have our own website as well, HyperionAdventuresPodcast.com. We even have our own YouTube page now where it's just pretty simple videos with the podcasts on them in their entirety. But if it's another way you can find us and get us on your phone or wherever else you want to listen to us, you can in that way. And please, if you get a chance, subscribe to us, and hopefully you're already subscribed to the Jedi Temples Archives podcast.
Thanks so much, Tom. Yeah, and please go out there and check them out. They do put on a great podcast, a lot of information both on Star Wars and Disney as a whole, and it's always presented in a fun and entertaining way. So, again, Tom, thank you for joining us this week for Jedi Temple Archives podcast. Again, as we tell you each week, we are available on all the main podcast platforms. I do want to give a special shout out to one of our listeners, John, who listens to our podcast on Pocket Casts. And when he realized it wasn't out there, he submitted our feed and let me know that he'd done that. So again, anything that we can do to get the podcast out on a new platform where you're going to be able to find it, please let us know. If you have any ideas for future show ideas or any questions that you want answered on the show, please reach out to us with that information. We can be reached at jtapodcast@gmail.com. And also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest at JTA Podcast. Again, we're looking forward to hearing back from you. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review. It's going to make it a lot easier for other listeners to find us in the future. And we look forward to bringing you a lot of great content down the road. Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.